EPRS, European Parliamentary Research Service, you're very welcome to our beautiful library facility here and to the European Parliament for those of you coming from outside the institution. And on behalf of our Director of the Members Research Service, Etienne Bassot, who was going to open the event and welcome you, also welcome. He was called to another meeting with President Metsola of a working group he has to chair, so he was excused. But my name is Fergus O'Bara, and I'm heading the Structural Policies Unit in the Members Research Service, which includes, of course, agricultural policy and work that tries to underpin the efforts of the members of Parliament in that area. And we're delighted to be partnering today with EASAC, and that's the European Academies Science Advisory Council. And we have the president of EASAC here, Wim van Saarloos, who will say a few words of introduction. And indeed, EPRS in sort of pre-lockdown times partnered with EASAC for a number of events of bringing their findings and their science and their research here to the heart of the European institutions. So that will just be some more words of introduction. And then after that, we will pass over to the presentation which will be given of the report on regenerative agriculture in Europe by two professors here, Thomas Elmqvist, who is the project director, and Orsolia, the co-chair of the working group for EASAC on regenerative agriculture. So they'll give a presentation of the content of the report, including visual presentation that you'll see there. And then after that, we'll move on to a panel discussion on it, which by then we hope our two MEPs, we are told, are on their way, will have well and truly joined us on the panel. And we also we'll have our experts, of course, still there, and we'll have two colleagues from the European Commission also on the panel. But I'll leave Teresa here, Teresa Pinto de Rezende, who is the head of the Agriculture Committee Secretariat in the Parliament. She'll be moderating the panel and she'll introduce them one by one and explain the rules of the game, as it were, in terms of participation from the online audience and from the floor as well. So without further ado, I'll ask Wim van Saarloos to come and say a few words on behalf of EASAC. Thanks.
Thanks, Fergus. So, let me see. My slide is coming up in a second, but I'm here to welcome you on behalf of ESAC to this event to a debate about the report that we've written on regenerative agriculture. And not only do I want to welcome you on behalf of ESAC, I would also like to start first and foremost with thanking the EPRS for the invitation to come here and to discuss and with you our report and to share visions and look at the future. And also was very happy to hear that we are reviving with this event a long tradition of having discussion events here in this wonderful building in the heart of European democracy. So I'm really intending to take up on the invitation to come here in the future more often. Now, I'd like to only take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about what ESAC is. ESAC, in a nutshell, is the organization of European academies, mostly in the sciences, including not only the EU members, but also including Switzerland, the UK, and Norway. And what we basically do is we bring the scientists and the excellence in science in Europe through the academies together to give science for policy advice to Europe. We do that basically in 3 programs: the biosciences and public health, in energy, and in environment. And of course, environment is the core program that we're building on today. And so I would like to stress once more, we are an independent organization. We're not a lobby group. We just, the scientists that work for us and the scientists who are here actually also on the panel, our chair of the working group, is doing that all of it for free. It's not a paid job or it's not part of a lobby organization. It is our mission to bring the best of science to Europe through science for policy advice. I'm not going to run you through the whole structure of ESAC, but look at the bottom, and that reflects the 3 programs that I mentioned. You'll see basically the structure, and that's what I want to focus on. If you look on the right, where I encircled the environment program, we have a steering panel that is composed of scientists that have been nominated by our member academies to serve on the steering panel. Typically, a member serves about 5 years or so. And the steering panel meets twice a year to discuss the developments in science and in society and in Europe. What are good themes to pick up on and to provide a report on. And so that is their core mission. They're supported by a program director that is who is someone who's really is available for running the whole program in that particular area and supports both the steering panel and the working groups. And that brings me to the working groups. Once we've selected a topic to write a report on, then we form a working group. That's an ad hoc group, and they work together with the program director to make a report. Now, I've mentioned already a few times report, and you saw on my previous slides that besides reports that basically build on a study roughly of about a year or so, and that we make into a report, in addition to that, we have commentaries and statements. And these are shorter types of products that we use to act on more quickly, more swiftly, but typically build on work that we've done in the past, but that we allow or that we use to give commentaries, for instance, on science developments or developments in the policy that Europe is doing. So, yeah, there we go. Here you see the products more or less back again in these 3 pillars. And I'm not going to run you through all these examples, but if you just glance at some of the titles, you'll see that all our science for policy reports really touch on some of the most urgent issues of our societies today. And again, let's focus on the right, where you see the environmental program again. You see the topic of today is actually something that we published last year, the regenerative agriculture, and that's the topic of the discussion here today. We're very fortunate to be back here after this long COVID period. You see we have these regular programs coming, and you can expect us to be back quite soon in the future with new projects from also the other themes that we're working on. Yeah, there we go. So I think let's now move to the debate, and first of all to the introduction that will be given by Thomas Elquist, who was the program director, the project officer, and then the chair also of the working group. They're already sitting ready here, so let me step down and give the floor to Thomas, who will speak first, I understand.
Thank you very much, Wim, and good afternoon, everyone. I also want to express my gratefulness to be here and for EPRS to host this event. I think we will have a very exciting afternoon discussing this concept of regenerative agriculture. As Wim said, this was published last year, and it was a result of a very large group representing 25 member academies and a large group of interdisciplinary scientists that came together to try to understand and make a scientific critical evaluation of this concept of regenerative agriculture, which is sort of coming up and being quite new. But we were interested, what are the scientific evidence for regenerative agriculture being an important pathway towards a more sustainable agriculture in Europe. But before we go into the content and the details, I just want to put European agriculture in our current very turbulent context of what I would say we live in a world with polycrisis. We have multiple crises occurring at the same time, interacting, having global effects. And that is particularly true for energy and food, that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have seen these surges of prices for energy and food, and these actually interact and causing effects on a global scale. However, we should also be mindful that even before February 24th last year, there have been a long time, there have been drivers and effects on both the food system and energy system that actually sort of paved the way for what actually then was triggered during the last year. So these global effects have then led to, well, increased food insecurity, and it's driving inflation, and also increased social and political instability. So these are sort of effects and challenges we need to address. But I would also be very, to point out that crises are also always windows of opportunities, change and transformation. And I think we're living in a time where we have deep crises, but this is also the time to start with some new thinking and stake out some new directions. And you can already see on the ground that the spiraling prices of mineral fertilizers, for example, have increased interest among farmers all over Europe to look for alternatives, to look for how they could use better systems for nutrient cycling, how they could expand the use of legumes, for example. And also the spiraling prices of energy, in particular diesel. Farmers around Europe are now looking what could be alternative ways for fueling tractors and machinery, looking into biogas, which they could produce themselves, or electric vehicles. So I just want to remind, we live in a time of crisis, but this is also a time where we could actually stake out new pathways. And I think it's in this context, we also want to put regenerative agriculture. So what is regenerative agriculture? Well, there's no consensus definition. We choose the definition that actually have three important components. Maintaining production of high quality food for consumers, that's of course a very important objective, but at the same time increase biodiversity and particularly restore and maintain soil biodiversity, and that's a key part of this, enhancing ecosystem services, including carbon capture and storage. So these are three important aims and objectives for agriculture and for agricultural policy. So regenerative agriculture, despite gaining a huge international interest, and if you start to Google, you can see there's a spike of usage of this term, not only from the research community and agricultural policy community, but also from the private sector. But we discovered that was actually not really a very deep, critical, scientific evaluation of this concept. What is the evidence behind this? So that was the rationale for why ESAC thought this would be an important area where the research community in Europe could actually give an important input to the policy arena. But before we go into the details of the report, I just want to emphasize one thing, and that is the surprising large untapped potential of the agricultural landscape for carbon capture and storage, and particularly perhaps during the next 20 to 30 years. This has been somewhat overlooked, but I think IPCC published this graph in the report in April 2022, showing the contribution of different actions from society to net emission reduction by 2030. And when it comes to replacing emissions, you can see that wind and solar energy are by far the most important actions society could take. When it comes to land use, in the bottom of the graph, you see that actually carbon capture and storage in agricultural landscape has a very large potential, surprisingly large, and I think it's been overlooked in the discussion compared to, we're all aware of the importance of forests and wetlands for carbon storage, and that has been discussed and known for a long time, but the agriculture landscape has not been part of this discussion, and I think it's time we actually put it in the center and understand, and particularly grasslands, which we have lots of in Europe, are important for this need we have for increasing carbon storage and capture in the next couple of decades. It's not enough to replace emissions with wind and solar. We also need to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's absolutely essential. Otherwise, we will fail the goals of the Paris Agreement very badly. So what did we do in this report? We went through more than 25 farming practices that have been associated with regenerative agriculture. And we asked the question, what is the scientific evidence that this practice actually contributes to increased carbon storage? What is the evidence that it increases biodiversity? And what is the evidence that, even if it do, how is food production affected? So we actually made a very thorough analysis. We went through 36 meta-analysis and systematic reviews and 250 empirical papers which we scrutinized for evidence. And the result was that we were quite surprised that there were quite many of these farming practices that in the literature, piece by piece, have been investigated when we put it together, that there were examples of quite striking synergies, that if you implement one action for increasing carbon storage, it would also at the same time enhance biodiversity. And in quite a few cases, it was also been investigated that the effect on food production was just marginal, and in the long term, actually positive. So that was sort of very encouraging results. And if I want to summarize our recommendations, we've been looking at all those farming practices and to what extent they will contribute to maintaining agricultural productivity, restoring biodiversity and soil health, and enhance carbon capture and storage. And at the farm scale, we found a number that would actually show these synergies, that if you invest in one, you would also get co-benefits in the other arenas. So for example, the text is a bit small, but having perennial or permanent crops, covering the land with cover crops during all seasons, reduced tilling, diversification, and both within and among crops are examples of these farming practices that would have synergetic effects. And these are then implemented now in Europe within the policy environment of the biodiversity strategy, the farm to fork strategy, and the common agriculture policy. And to quite some extent, they are actually supported by that policy framework. And also there is an evolving toolbox, including sustainable innovation when it comes to pest control, nutrient cycling, and many, many other areas, which also support the implementation of these practices. Where we did find, I think, we were also surprised, but we did find quite strong scientific evidence that it's not sufficient to just address the farm scale and the support now coming through the common agriculture policy to the individual farms. If you're going to reach these goals, you also have to address the landscape scale. And this is perhaps a bit more challenging, but we found very strong evidence for that there are these larger scale processes that needs also to be supported through policy for actions on the larger scale. And to today, we don't have those as part of the policy framework, and we don't have those as part of the evolving toolbox. But I will now leave the word to Orsi to go a bit deeper into this landscape scale, which I think is a very exciting arena, and also something that will really be exciting to start thinking more about what could be the policy instruments that could be effective. So Orsi, please.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and good evening, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very honored to be here, and following up the thoughts of Thomas, I would like to introduce our main messages regarding the landscape scale. So the agricultural landscape is a very complex, multifunctional system. It goes beyond the crop production, and it provides a lot of important ecosystem services for the society. And as Thomas already showed in the table, we identified during our work a lot of very promising farming practices that provide synergies between crop production, biodiversity conservation, and carbon capture and storage that work very well on the farm scale. But it's very interesting that we found that there is strong evidence that if these practices are done in a coordinated way, they can have multiple additional benefits at the landscape scale. So it's a very, very important message. So the site-specific outcomes can be upscaled to the landscape scale. And the scientific evidence behind this is very strong. It's a very strongly developing field of restoration ecology and landscape ecology and agroecology. And currently there are a lot of restoration momentum going on. We just entered the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. So we hope that this scientific field will be very rapidly developing in the future. And in the next slide, I would like to show you an example of a typical European agricultural landscape along a landscape intensification gradient. You can see different types of landscapes, very intensified landscape on the left, and a landscape containing semi-natural habitats in a large extent on the right. And you can see that the different types of landscapes provide different types and different amounts of ecosystem services. And what is very, very important, that there is a strong trade-off between the provisioning ecosystem services, which are the crop production, and the other types of ecosystem services. And these other types are essential because they sustain the long-term sustainability of farming. They are the services that can sustain soil health for medium-term and long-term production. So if we consider farming on a medium or long-time scale, we really need to treat this delicate balance between the different types of ecosystem services, and we need to bring back nature to the agricultural landscape to provide a landscape context that can maintain different types of ecosystem services. And for this, the restoration of semi-natural habitats within the agricultural landscape is a very good option. This nice figure is from a recently published paper, published after our report, but I would like to show it because it captures very well our main messages as well. So this figure is based on a global meta-analysis, but we found very similar in our research. So the main essence is that improving the complexity of the landscape can help to improve the biodiversity of agroecosystems in different steps. So, for example, if we target policies that support the diversification of cropland, we can improve the heterogeneity of the agricultural landscape and can provide resources for the wildlife throughout the year. If we support policies aiming at decreasing field sizes, we can increase the configurational heterogeneity of the landscape, and this way we can support the movement of the wildlife across the landscape. And if we increase the compositional diversity of the landscape, then we can manage and restore non-crop semi-natural habitats within the agricultural landscapes, which are very important pools for the biodiversity in the landscape. And our results show that, as Thomas also mentioned, that it is very important to have a better coordination of farming practices. So we should go beyond the farm scale, and we should coordinate the management actions. And in this way, we can have much better results, added values in terms of biodiversity and carbon capture and storage. And for this, we recommend to support schemes that do not only target the individual farmer, but also the coordination of groups of farmers, because this way we could achieve more results. And one solution can be the National Rural Development Program framework for this. We also suggest supporting sustainable innovation for rural-urban nutrient cycling, and to adapt and develop indicator systems that are working also on the landscape scale, so develop easily measurable and robust indicators, for example, field size or the extent of high diversity landscape features. And our analysis also showed that result-based indicators work much better than activity-based ones, because in case of result-based indicators, the farmers can have a sort of flexibility to adapt those management practices that are suitable for them from a locally suitable toolkit, as long as they can maintain the required results. And one of the goals of the biodiversity strategy is that to have 10% of the agriculturally utilized area under high diversity landscape features. And our results show that this is a very promising avenue actually. So these high diversity landscape features include flower strips, hedgerows, field margins, tree alleys. And these are those elements that can really connect the small habitats, the small non-crop patches within the agricultural landscape. And if we use these diverse landscape features in a wise way with a spatial prioritization, then we can maximize the farm scale results, upscale them to the landscape scale. So this is a very promising avenue, especially in simple landscapes. And finally, the biodiversity strategy also aims to have 25% of cropland under organic farming. And this is also a very important avenue, but our analysis suggests that we should consider more in depth whether the organic intensification practices are harmful and how harmful are they for the biodiversity. And there is a need for a critical evaluation between these two very promising pathways, organic farming and conventional farming with landscape diversification, which is the more effective for both biodiversity conservation and crop production. So this is work for the future, perhaps. And I would like to recommend you our report, which is available on that link, and we hope that it will bring a lot of good ideas for many of you, and thank you very much for your attention.
I think now it's my turn to present the panelists. I would like to just first wish you a good afternoon. My name is Teresa Pinto-Rezende. I'm the head of the Agri Committee Secretariat here in the Parliament, and I'm very proud to receive here 3 of the 4 panelists, in addition to the authors of the study. I would like to start by the MEP Sirpa PIETIKÄINEN, who is an MEP, as I just told, since 2008, so it has been some time already. She sits in the Econ Committee, Human Rights Committee, and also in Environment Committee. And actually, she seeks to combine her 2 specialities, which are environment and economics. She is the president of Global EU, which is a platform that aims to facilitate structured discussions between the members of the European Parliament, Commission officials, specialists, and various stakeholders throughout the organization of high-level events. She was Finland's Minister of Environment from 1991 to 1995, and she holds a Master in Economics. I will continue with another MEP, Martin HLAVÁČEK. I forgot to say that Ms. PIETIKÄINEN sits in the EPP group, sorry. Martin HLAVÁČEK, he sits in the Renew group. He has been a member elected in Czech Republic since 2019. He's a vice chair of the subcommittee on tax. He's a member of the Agri Committee, and where he actively promotes the interests of Czech and European citizens in the agriculture, food sector, and rural development. He began his career as a diplomat in Athens. He also worked in the permanent rep in Czechia, where he was participating in the negotiations of the Common Agricultural Policy for 2014-2020. And he was also involved in the protection of local and traditional Czech products. He was Deputy Minister of Agriculture, and he's graduated of the University of Life Sciences of Prague. I will continue on my left side. Emmanuel Petel is a policy officer in DG Agri. He works on the integration of environment concerns into the common agricultural policy, in particular in relation to soil health and carbon sequestration, and the promotion of nature-based practices such as agroforestry and agroecology. He was involved in the preparation and negotiation of the new greening architecture in the CAP and the new funding opportunities such as the eco schemes. And last but not least, not present but online, Luca Montanarella is a senior expert in the JRC on land resources and supply chain assessment unit. He was closely involved in the creation of global soil partnerships at the FAO. He chaired intergovernmental technical panel on soils and co-chaired intergovernmental platform for biodiversity and ecosystems on land degradation and restoration assessment from 2016 to 2018. He's currently a project leader in GIRC on soil health, which includes the newly established EU Soil Observatory. He's a member of the Academy of Agricultural Science of France, Doctor Honoris Causa at the Academy of Agriculture in Bulgaria, and member of the Academy of Agricultural Science of Slovakia. I have the pleasure to welcome you all here and try to launch a bit the debate. And I would like maybe to start with PIETIKÄINEN. The floor is yours, maybe.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this event. I'll start a bit further down, not the agriculture. But when we are having the big paradigm change, the question is, how do we see the reality and the truth? And if one thinks that the world is flat, it is very hard to convince that kind of a person to start an effort to sail around it, because it is futile or all in all straightforward dangerous, because you would fall out of the flat cover sooner or later. Sometimes when we are sort of discussing these environmental changes, sort of the planetary boundaries and living within the resource efficiency by tenfold, it seems to be this kind of a debate that those ones that think that the circular economy needs to exist, that there are limits in planet, are talking to at least partly to those ones that think that the world is endless, so the world is flat. And before we sort of can agree the change, this kind of a groundbreaking changes are very hard to make. And this is exactly what we would need to do, because if we take incremental changes like seems to happen with our common agricultural policy, a lot of fuss and buzz and fights, and actually then a lot of politicians saying, yes, actually we did proceed with the environmental matters, and it is incremental small steps here and there. And so I'm leaving you with questions, and my first question is, how do you help the paradigm change within the European Parliament, within the Agri Committee, within politicians? What should we all, you, be doing? And how you do it in COPA-COSEC? Because before that, the change is really difficult. Well, my second question then is, how do we communicate and understand the speed, the urgency of actions? I just read the book called 60 Harvests. And this is what the science tells, that if we go business as usual with the industrial agriculture, more or less this is the amount what we have left. And after that, we've sort of used our soil to be plain dust, and not even adding fertilizers would add that much. And at the same time, we are increasing the amount of meat production that needs, of course, more fertilizers, more feed, so on. So this is not a matter of opinion, like I think that this ESAC study shows it very well too. You need to change. Then the third question is actually, how do you give the hope? And how do you help people invest, farmers, for the hope? And there we have individual farmers here and there, and organic farmers, and those ones, I call it, who get it. But basically it would mean changing our diet. So EU would need to have a food politics. And we should actually cut down of meat consumption to, I don't know, 1/10, 1/20th part of what it is on average at the moment. We should stop talking about vegetarian or vegetable diets. They are just diets. And you should call any meat eaters here? Anyone who can't eat vegetables? Raise your hand, please. Then you get the small, nice pig next to your plate, and to show that you are provided the meat. And there, actually, the point then is that we should add the animal welfare here also, and that means in very great extent, not totally, but great extent, outbreeding. Lower numbers, better quality, better life quality for animals. But then again, huge change in common agricultural policy structures. You should reward on CO2 farming, on regenerating the soil, on getting up at least 1/3 of the biodiversity, is the rewildering, of having diversity in vegetation and diversity in animal farming too. What species you have and what under qualities they are, so that you would have the sustainability. And you would need to be compensated properly on this. So my last question is, how do you fit this in common agricultural policy? And how you make that pact that, like, we have this border control mechanism on CO2, we would need to fit the same logic with agriculture and our international agreements. And I'm just very afraid of Mercosur agreement, because I understand and sympathize with farmers if they need to compete with, let's say, Brazilian broiler, without going in details, with the GMO soyas and pesticides and stuff like that. But this is a complex, big issue that needs to be out of sort of the heading or labeling agriculture. We coming from agriculture, and we lobbying the agriculture, and we defending the agriculture, decide what is agriculture. And this needs to be a broader societal question, where broader societal health requirements, sustainability requirements, ethical requirements come in place. And that's why I actually think that in EU, I hope we should have in next commission, instead of agri, we should have a food commissioner and a food committee. Basically, well, this is it. We do not have sports equipment committees either. And on scale, it is almost the same amount of money. And this is very drastic change, but I just wanted to challenge you a bit.
I forgot to say that I would ask the panelists to speak for 4 or 5 minutes maximum, just to make sure that everyone can speak. Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for a very informative report. And I think you are helping us. You are helping us to some extent, but I would have a number of topics where I think you could help us even going forward. I think when we analyze if we are on the right pathway towards sustainability in all that is related to agri-food and non-food chains, we have to pose ourselves quite objective questions. First, how are we doing today? Because from that we derive if it makes sense to do tomorrow differently or the same way. Are we doing enough? And also, what are the means that we have to make it happen within a time frame that is reasonable? And for us, the time frame, for us here, I think the time frame is quite clear, and these are our Green Deal, Farm to Fork and other strategies commitments. So let me elaborate a little bit on those elements. I think we often forget whether we are doing well or we are doing poorly. Quite often we have the impression we are doing overwhelmingly poorly. Well, then there's nothing easier than check against the facts and data. And let me just mention a couple of most recent figures. Over the past 27 years, EU farming sector has reduced CO2 emissions by 19%, while the rest of the world went up by double digits, including places like Brazil, Africa, 50 plus, 61 plus. We reduced by 21 our methane footprint, while others went up by high double digits. The same on N2Os, the same on N2Os from synthetic fertilizers. We are the only region around the globe that is in negative figures, meaning we have reduced. But then the question is it enough to achieve what we want to achieve? No, even if we did well, we need to do more and better. While at the same time, and that's what I liked on your definition, because I'm always a little bit annoyed, especially running businesses here and around and abusing the word of regenerative farming, because there's something else of regenerative farming, a system of Pepsi Cola, another from Nestle, then you have other companies, and they are running here in circles and telling us we do the right way of regenerative farming. But if you ask what is the definition, they are quite reluctant to tell us there's no definition, like what you did right at the beginning of your presentation. And what I particularly liked on your definition is that you perceive it as a productive system, not non-productive system. And I think the figures I have just mentioned are telling us we have quite sound grounds to believe that we are the right place to have productive farming, but productive farming that at the same time encompasses to the greatest extent possible up to the state of the art of our knowledge and science and capabilities and resources, the most sustainable way of producing here. And I think this is one of the basic questions we often are still having unnecessary debates about, because I would appreciate if we turn into the next step and have a serious debate, how do we make it happen? Because there is the trick, and there is where we have still some gap. And I fully endorse what you've mentioned. The benefits are, we don't have time to go in that much detail, but the benefits of what you call results-based system, we more call it performance system, we have to subscribe. That what was missing was at what level? What level? At the country level, at the farm practices level, or at the farm level? I have a lot of reasons to believe that we would have to arrive that far that we go at the farm level, because this is the fairest approach, but at the same time, it is complex. Because what are our tools to make it happen? We have not invented, and I am sure we won't invent anything more simple than a common denominator, which in this context is soil or a piece of land, if you will. And we need to reflect on that common denominator. What are the society expectations here, and what are our targets that we have set for us on greenhouse gas emissions, on biodiversity, and I would add up 2 more, on chemical inputs and on welfare, because these are the 4 major buckets, or 4 major elements that we are having commitment to solve. And then try to square it on a piece of land. And here you mentioned indicators and methodology, and this is what we would desperately need. Why? Because we need to turn enormous complexity. Carbon is complex, but it's still okay. We already are very close to solutions. Biodiversity, it's a bigger beast, right? What is biodiversity? It encompasses everything, but then how do you translate it on a farm level? How do you find out an indicator that would be telling you this farm is doing well on biodiversity? I saw multiple solutions, and with your help, I think, and others' help, we can get there. The same on chemical inputs, the same on welfare. And if we would be able to combine this at our ability to evaluate at the farm level, we are closer to the solutions. And then the last point from my perspective, then we need to think about whether we stay academic or whether we are able to turn it into practice, and if we want to achieve our targets by 2040, 50, whatever, to move it into a scale. How to move it into a scale? Because we would have here 8 million farms in Europe, plus hundreds of thousands foresters, plus other actors on the land. How do we translate this complexity into a functional model? Do we need CAP for that or not? One would say very likely yes. But does the CAP today have a potential to make it? If you look at CAP potential as a policy, it's economic policy. We sometimes forget it. Yeah? We sometimes mix it with many other objectives. But the theoretical basis of CAP is economic policy. That means it is incentivizing someone to behave differently that he would otherwise behave if he would just follow the market signals. That's why we are paying that load of money to get something more than a profit, but also what we call externalities that the society is requesting for. But we have to be also confronted with the natural fact that over the past 15 years, the incentive potential of CAP is diminishing slowly, because the amount of money remained the same while the value getting from the market has increased. So, in fact, we cannot rely that CAP would have the same potential to move people in the right direction. Second, is the land our property? It is not. It is someone else's. So, unless we attract him to join the system, because there is no obligation to be part of CAP. In fact, this is the motivation, the money today. And we already start hearing that from farmers with this new reform that is coming into operation this year. Oh guys, this is already so complex and demanding and bureaucratic and burdensome that we better keep your money in Brussels and we do free ride, whatever we want. But is this what we want to achieve? No. By this we won't get there. So we need simple model that is applicable to as many as possible at a farm level, performance-based, and then to find how to evaluate this performance, and also how to remunerate this performance. And here, I'm quite convinced, unless we marry CAP with a broader value chain going forward, a similar way what we did in ETS in other sectors, we will never get there. We will never get there because we can have a lot, and we still don't have it. So please help us to develop as soon as possible the indicators and the methodology behind, and then we have to have serious thoughts. How do we reshape CAP, but also other policies, to bring the value from the market through the entire value chain also to this direction for the farmers level? Thank you.
Can I move it to you? Please, I will give the floor now to Emmanuel Petel.
Okay, I think it's okay now. Yes, I'm pleased to be there and to have an exchange with academia or MEP on this topic. And okay, I'm in DG Agri, and we are huge responsibility to implement and to design a common agricultural policy. I will come back on the report. For me, for my side, I welcome the report because for the time being, anyway, we are not in a good shape due to the Ukrainian war, inflation, but there is a big debate, but this report provides good key message for agricultural activity and the various challenges in a comprehensive way. And there is a good recognition of some farming practices. It's important to underline that. And for me, in the report, we could mention at the same time there is a win-win approach. It's important to underline, in fact, there is always an antagonist between environmental approach and the productivity approach. It's important to keep the both elements in both ways and in a synergistic way. And in this report, we have the feeling there is some possibility, there is some capacity to achieve that. And from my side, it's important due to the current atmosphere and the current critical view, it's important to have the both situations. And I want to underline on the fact as well, it's important to, as regards climate mitigation, you underline the fact it's not only forest, there is a role of other agricultural habitat, and for me it's important to underline that. As regards ecosystem restoration, you put a concept of regenerative agriculture, and after is a key practices, crop rotation, agroforestry. That means it's not a restoration for big investment. Sometimes is underpinned by some relevant practices, and it's important to show that. For me, it's important as well at this time to give a good message on the role of livestock, ruminant, because it's a controversial issue due to the fact there is a methane emission, but here you put emphasis on the role of livestock as the maintenance of some habitat and depending on the condition of the grazing, indeed. But you maybe should be more developed because at some stage you put the fact you could have a high input system for livestock. Maybe we should develop more of that because there is some possibility in this direction as well. And another message is to have a synergy between carbon storage and biodiversity, because as you know, the Commission will launch a carbon farming system, and today there is on the table a basic regulation, but we will go in a further step to define what we expect via the carbon farming. But it is important, as you mentioned, we need to address as well biodiversity, and there is a co-benefit between carbon storage and biodiversity. I want to say I was pleased as well on the fact you developed some key practices, because under the CAP, you mentioned it in the report, we as well underline some key practices like green cover, permanent green cover during the year, crop diversification, what crop diversification can bring, or crop rotation, and as you have already developed, is a landscape feature. And for us, it's important because, as you mentioned in the report, we try to have some relevant instrument to promote landscape feature. Even it's not so easy at the farm level, I can admit, but it's important to have this, I would say, argument and to have this analysis. Because, as you know, we have issue pollinator communication last 2 weeks, and it's important to, as you mentioned, to have a semi-natural habitat, non-crop structure inside of the farm. Yes, just to come back on recommendation, because there is a list of recommendations in your report. And it's just to be in line what our MEP expressed. I think we need to have a more communication to the farmer, because CAP is not only some rule, administrative rule to get a payment, and only constrained, but we need to better explain that at the farm level, what is the interest and what is the benefit of some practices. After, if we want to go to further step, because via the CP, we cannot go very far in a detail, because it's a payment and sometimes it's income support for the farmer, and it's important because there is an economic and socio-economic aspect in the CAP. That means if we provide support and to promote some good practices, we cannot too much elaborate some practices. But there is a room to provide advice for farmers, and it was a little bit mentioned, underlined in the report, because when you are talking about landscape fisher, it's not a question of percentage, it's not a question of target, it's just to how to advise farmer to put the landscape fisher in a good place in the farm and to have a good composition of species. All these elements should be better explained to the farmer to see the add value at the farm level. When you impose something, it's just not to impose something, it's just to do something in a good direction and to have add value at the same time as the farm level. That means we need to be there and to provide advice for the farmer. And I see in the recommendation you mentioned could we have more targeted element when we talk about, for example, the new scheme, the new support via eco scheme, could we be more targeted, and could we propose, for example, a menu, a toolkit for farmer to give more flexibility for the farmer? Just to remind on the fact, eco scheme is part of income support. So that means we, at some stage, member state has to evaluate how to support the farmer, which kind of farmer has to be involved. But at some stage, if we want to be more targeted and to have a toolkit for farmer, maybe we need to see how to organize the farmer, because among farmers, there is different type of farmer, and maybe there is some front runners, more advanced farmer, and this farmer can go further step. But we need to find some on the ground, some bodies, some association to give advice for the farmer and to go further step. Because we need, when we have a public money, it's a question of confidency, how to allocate the money, because sometimes is for the good objective, but how we, after the farmer will implement the action, it's very difficult to check that. And we don't need to spend too much control on that. But if there is between the farmer and between the public body some association, it could be in a good way to see the support. And just to remind of the fact, in our direction, we want to go for the step for indicators, but we need to work at the Commission level with other direction to grasp relevant indicator, because it takes time. We need to have some survey, and Lucas and our colleague can develop that. And just to mention as a fact, for us, it's important to promote some pilot project. And we have a research innovation department in our direction, and we want to promote some living lab, because we are convinced on the fact the change can come from the farmer, and we need, in living lab, you could have a farmer, researcher, advisor at the same time, and they can develop some itinerary, some practice on the spot, and to see if it's possible to test some practice. That's it for me.
Floor, last but not least, to Luca Montanarella. That will be connecting online as the last element of the panel. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, and apologies if I'm not with you in person. This event is really very relevant, I think, and I would have liked to be there with you because I think this report is extremely timely, and it is relevant for many reasons. And let me say the first reason was already mentioned. The term regenerative agriculture has been floating around us already since several years. You may know that this is a term which has emerged in the United States around the Rodale Institute, a group of activists that it's been spreading over all the world and reached also us here in Europe. And so this assessment that is really needed has been making an attempt to place it in our particular context of Europe and of the European Union and within also our policy framework. So I really think this was needed and it's very helpful. And what is also very relevant is that this is a science-based assessment. So I was very much impressed by the amount of literature and of scientific evidence that has been used for compiling this document. The second reason that makes it to me very relevant is that, and it's related to my area of work, is that the soils are central to the concept of regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is mainly about regenerating soil health. And here comes the second term, which is now floating around us here in Europe, but again, a term that has been emerging several years ago in the United States, which is the concept of soil health. Soil health implies that we recognize that soils are alive. Soils are a living ecosystem. We recognize that there is often more biodiversity below ground and above ground. And this living ecosystem is delivering to us ecosystem services which we need. And so regenerative agriculture is also mainly about regenerating these ecosystem services, regenerating a healthy soil. Now in Europe we need this because our recent assessment has been demonstrating through our data that we have more than 60% of European soils which are not in a healthy condition. And so we need to do something about it. And that's why you may know that we have an ongoing discussion in the Commission towards presenting a proposal for a soil health law in the framework of the soil strategy that was already presented a year ago. So there is really a relevance of regenerative agriculture in that context. And so this report can help us quite a lot, particularly if I look to the farming practices that you have been listing as being positive for regenerative agriculture practices. Several of these practices are also what we have identified as sustainable soil management practices, and that will be somehow addressed in the future proposal. This is because we need to have a change, it was already said, and we need to have a change of practices that move the entire system towards a more sustainable and also more long-term regenerative vision of these very important services that soils provide to all us. Of course, you identified one of the major services that soils provide, which is, of course, the capacity of soil to capture and store carbon. You may know that soils are a major sink for carbon, and this particularly organic carbon is also the fuel that is needed for the biodiversity in soil to be thriving. So the entire ecosystem of soil is based on the fact that we have sufficient organic matter in these soils. And so regenerating soils and rebuilding this organic carbon stock is important for making soil healthier, but also is important, of course, as you mentioned, for mitigating climate change. So in a nutshell, I think this report is extremely helpful. The scientific basis is very solid, and we were really needing this because, as was said, the term regenerative agriculture has been hijacked by many different interest groups, and we were really missing a solid, independent scientific assessment of what regenerative agriculture actually is and what its potential is. Of course, we need to round up also the regenerative agriculture concept to other things that we are doing here in Europe already since a long time. You mentioned organic farming, for example. Obviously, organic farming includes many of the practices that are there already in regenerative agricultural concept. So let me conclude rapidly also to give time for maybe an interactive question and answer session. That this report is very timely, and that certainly this can really help us in the ongoing discussion towards soil health law, and particularly towards a more sustainable management of our soil resources in the European Union. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luca. It was very interesting. I just wanted to point maybe something that was really not mentioned, because what I found from the study, actually I was also impressed by all the literature that you went through, but the distinction between long-term and short-term, because it is something that is quite often coming. And we see here in the Parliament the different committees mostly involved, which is Agriculture and Environment, and we see that maybe the Agriculture Committee tends to speak more into a short term, because we hear the measures and the members try to accommodate or try to pass the message for that on what has to be done. And you have the perspective of the long term, which is something to be achieved. And I think also this is the dichotomy that relates as well when we speak about strategies and when you speak about a policy that is already in place. So maybe this was just a further element to be brought forward. I know that Martin wants to come in to react, so I will give both MEPs the possibility to react, and then we give the floor to the audience. Please.
Yeah, thank you very briefly. I think sometimes we have a tendency to realize that complex issues do not have trivial solutions. And this is why I'm sorry, please listen, because you don't listen that much in the Commission recently. This is, I think, the trap you have moved yourself in, that you're trying to provide trivial solutions to complex topics. What do I have in mind? You are, and you mentioned that, we have a lot of solutions that are on our reach, but we are pushing forward bits and pieces, not a complex solution. Why do you propose legislation on pesticides without publishing legislation on new genomic techniques or precision farming? These are all linked topics. Why do we have on the table soon carbon farming while we are waiting for a soil health law? Why don't we do packages of legislation like we do in Fit for 55 or other domains where we have moved finally into something that we have been teaching here for decades, that is policy coherence? Why are not we doing this on such important things like that? This is one of the main obstacles that we are not moving forward fast enough, because simply trivial solutions are not fit for complex issues. So I would be very much in favor to have solutions that are packages. Well, they would encompass different types of legislations elsewhere, but then they would be intrinsically interconnected, would make logic, and would bring us to the solutions much faster. Sorry for that critics, but it's been quite enough for the last years. And you have mentioned, I would not mention that if you didn't, you have mentioned eco schemes. I am half guilty of it. I was drafting it as a legislator with our colleagues here. And this is an exemplary example of the trouble we sometimes have. We have defined measures that we know would work. And multiple of your farming practices you mentioned in the report, we have no doubts that they contribute positively to all the objectives we want. But quite often, we are forgetting that if our baseline assumptions are in conflict, none of the solution could work. because we are today confronted in a situation that farmers are not allowed to implement eco schemes. Why? Because they don't want? No, they would love to. Because owners don't allow them. Because if the land is not yours, you have to have a written contract with an owner if they allow you to do this. And many owners, if you have rented land, they tell you no, do it on someone else's land. What's the trouble? Why they don't want to do that? Why they don't want to allow farmers to do that? And they can't do it if they don't have it contractually agreed with the owner. Because, again, you have forgotten that still today, as we live, the value of land, when you buy it or sell it, is derived mainly from the productivity of land. And vast majority of all the management practices on land we are talking about, even if we have in mind productivity, they are by definition leading to lower productivity because we are, as a compensation, receiving some other externalities. But the real estate market today is still evaluating, and unless we change it, we'll continue to evaluate the value of land for sale and purchase based on productivity, not based on eco schemes or butterflies or other beautiful stuff we have invented to make our planet more beautiful, rightly so. So if the baseline is wrong, you can't motivate. Why owners should allow farmers to run eco schemes on their land if they know that by this measure, they would be, in fact, lowering the value of their property? There's no logic, correct? So that's why I'm sorry, again, advocating big time. Let's be please more policy coherent. And if we want to find solution for something that is complex, it should not be trivial. We should not publish bits and pieces here and there, and then find out that it's not consistent. And now it's very important because what you have rightly so analyzed for us, there is a huge potential. So let's do it, but let's do it properly. We need it.
Actually, I would like to start with the questions. Am I right? I've understood that with the Copernicus, quite soon we can calculate in detailed level what is the state of the biodiversity in very small land slot, and what is the emitting plus synchro of the soil and vegetation in certain areas for CO2. Doesn't that solve the problem that matter on the forests, but on the land area? You just require, as that kind of limit values. You need to fulfill at least this level to get the subsidies at all. And then if you go above this, then you get some bonus or some extras. And have you sort of thought anything like that in the system? Then the second question actually would be for the Commission or for EPRS or ESAC or someone. Could someone make, for us that are not farmers and are politicians, this kind of a wannabe CAP proposal? So how would it look like? What would you regulate? What would you incentivize? What would you in detail prohibit? How you would change the structure? Because this is the part that I think that someone else should debate this issue. Then I agree with my colleague and I disagree. I agree with you in theory. In practice, I'm not so sure, because if we would do the Fit for 55 in agriculture, I'm just afraid, I'm looking at my own political group, it just would be too much. And then it would sort of fall the whole cup. I mean, you drop the cup on the floor and you just don't deal anything. So that might be a wise decision to come with the bits and pieces, but the bits and pieces at least would need to lead to a greater choice. And I'm actually blaming Parliament even more than Commission. The Commission's proposal for the last reform wasn't that excellent. but the parliament managed to destroy even the small steps that were inside there. So, and I always thought that the parliament would be good for the agricultural policy and Europeans. I have my second thoughts.
We'll give the floor now to the public. Very short, please, because we don't have much time. So yeah, please, the lady there. I don't know if you can give her the. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm Irene Osnov. I'm the head of the Prevention and Wellbeing at Work Unit here in the European Parliament, but I'm here more as an interested citizen, and I'm on the brink of taking a year off to dedicate myself more to sustainability and to regenerative agroforestry. And I'm just a bit wondering here why we don't discuss much more the land use of meat production, because if Mr. HLAVÁČEK tells us that we are doing much better, I think that's because we are exporting our pollution to other sides of the world. So I don't think that we are doing much better on a global scale. And I also think that the land use for meat production, it's 10 times higher than it's for other crops. So meat production should be much more in the focus of this whole debate, I think. And in that sense, I agree a lot with Mrs. PIETIKÄINEN that it's really important that we think much more about how we make the diet of our European citizens more vegetarian and more plant-based and less meat-based. And maybe the only good way of doing that is calculating the price for meat, the real price for meat, the real price which is used to feed the animals with maize which is produced in South America, or soya which is produced in South America, that you really get this impact in the price for the meat, and that we can really reduce the meat production in Europe and then raise.
We don't have much time.
Maybe also.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Place where we can do.
Thank you. Can I have just another question? Behind, yes.
Many thanks. Konstantin from the European Agroforestry Federation. Very interesting discussion, wonderful report. Congratulations to the authors. I've taken some notes because it has been an interesting discussion. And this question is not about marriage, although Mr. HLAVÁČEK mentioned that it's about, we should also talk about marrying various initiatives. It's about speaking the same language, and I think there was a common denominator in the interventions of the MEPs when it comes to joining forces, not dividing the environment from agriculture when we speak about the future of how our food production would look like. And I think we have this confusion when we look at the landscape features, for example, and that's why I've taken some notes. So in the biodiversity strategy, in this report as well, in the nature restoration law, we use the language high diversity or high biodiversity landscape features, whereas in the CAP, Mr. Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, we have an indicator already, right, on landscape features on which member states should report. So I would encourage our colleagues from the Agri Committee to support this harmonization of the language, also in ongoing discussions on the nature restoration law, because we think this is important for farmers as well, to send a strong message on harmonization. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. One last question maybe, and then the panelists should conclude or reply. I don't know if the WebEx has, there is the WebEx questions. Thank you, Claudia.
So we have two questions coming in WebEx. The first one is, how is agricultural productivity measured in the study? It seems that average yields continue to increase despite the observed intensification. Or do you take into account any socio-economic variables? And then I have another question for Luca Montanarella. The EP has been advocating for a solid embedding of LUCAS in situ monitoring to ensure harmonized and regular data coming from all member states. Would you agree that the Commission and member states should invest into this tool, as satellite monitoring only cannot give the full picture of sustainability of agri-practices and state of, for example, soil? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I will, I don't know, maybe ask Luca to reply to this question in 1 minute, if possible, and then we will share among the panelists, if that is okay with you.
Of course, I will be very brief because it's a very clear answer. I know that remote sensing is a fantastic tool. I know that satellites can do a lot, but you cannot detect properties of soils below ground by remote sensing. You need to go in the field, you need to dig a hole in the ground, take samples, analyze physical and biological properties if you want to really know reality about soil conditions. So soil monitoring without sampling, unfortunately, is not possible. Remote sensing can help to detect above ground management practices. Some of the practices listed, for example, in table 2, I think, in the report of regenerative agricultural practices can be detected by remote sensing and can be monitored. But if you want to know about soils, you need to go in the ground. And currently, the only system we are operating as Commission is the one that was just mentioned by the MEP, which is LUCAS, a system that is coordinated by our statistical service, and we as JRC support the soil component of it. And you need to have surveyors going regularly on the field, take samples, measure, and observe. Now, a lot of this maybe in the future can be done together with the landowners and the farmers. This could be a fantastic system that would also give benefits to the landowner and the farmer, because they would be able to know more about their own soils. And so maybe together and with member states administrations have a coherent system for the entire European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you very much. I will give the floor now to the authors of the study only, because we really don't have much time. So maybe Thomas could take the floor first and then.
Thank you. Yeah, just a few comments. There was one question about how production was measured. So we took the simple measure of annual yield per hectare. So of course we could, because that was the one that was reported in the studies. But then I had a comment on your idea here of asking the research community to mobilize to develop performance indicators. And I think that's a call we actually should try to reach out to the European research community and start forming an interdisciplinary group that actually put our brains together and come up with a solution. I think it's possible to do. And it's so important that we reach a solution for workable, transparent, and I will also say scalable indicators, that you could actually use them on different scales. So I think we should challenge the research community to help Europe solve this.
Thank you. Ms. Valco, please. You can use this one, maybe.
Thank you very much. Just a short comment about how to attract the farmers and how to communicate the benefits of these farming practices to them. I think it's a very important point. And the problem is that these externalities, these non-production services are very far from them. So I think that very targeted communication would be needed to make them understand that why is it important for them as well, not for only for some big societal goal, but also for their lives. And there are some very good examples. For example, cover cropping in vineyards. If the farmers use cover cropping, they can see with their eyes within a few years that the soil erosion is stopped compared to other fields where they don't use it. So I think that these examples could give real hope. And based on this, I think it's very important, besides the financial incentives, to show that that they could really use these externalities in their life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have to finish here. I see that you wanted to make just a small comment, maybe.
I just owe the reply on the animals.
Yes, for sure.
Wasn't me. Look, it would be beautiful if we could assume that you can feed the planet with reducing the husbandry of animals around the globe. If you look at figures, well, it would be beautiful, but honestly, I have doubts that this is realistic. Even if we change the consumption patterns of the people in a relatively short period of time, I doubt it. But I think the research is telling us that we will need 40 to 60% more of food when the population would be getting to 9 to 10 billion. And if you look at land, and also the land around the globe in which shape the land is, we have another problem, because the suitable land for agriculture production, let's say for even substituting animal protein with plant protein, that, as you know, is less rich, so that you need more to feed the same amount of people, that is reducing. So try to recalculate 9 to 10 billion people for the available land in 2040, 2050, you likely come to a conclusion that we would still need. And I'm not even talking that we might do something here, but we would never have reached to those who are somewhere else. So my point was different. If we are the place around the globe where animal production has the lowest environmental and climate impact, does it make sense that we reduce here and allow somewhere else to produce more, while the demography is inevitably leading us that way? Or is it better that we marry the sustainability with the way of we are producing here and don't leave that space for others to fill in?
I'm sorry, I think you just need to continue it bilaterally, okay? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all. Thank you, Fergus, please.
Thank you, Teresa. And on behalf of the European Parliamentary Research Service, thank you to our online audience, to everybody who tuned in. Thank you to everybody who attended in person today. And thank you to all of our presenters and panelists, our MEPs, the Commission, EASAC, and of course to Teresa for moderating. European Parliamentary Research Service, as you see in our backdrop, we say we're about empowering through knowledge. And a debate and discussion on this very important issue of regenerative agriculture began here. We can see there wasn't time, and it certainly won't finish here, but some ideas have come forward, and also in response to the questions of the MEPs, we are EPRS always at your service to help with individual research requests for some of these ideas and help elaborate them. We will do that, and of course, with the powers given under the Lisbon Treaty on Agriculture, there's also the possibility of legislative initiatives here in the Parliament, so a lot more scope. So with that, I will say one final word, which is you're always invited to our EPRS events, online or in person. Our next one is going to be on a very different topic. It's a presentation of a book called Is Europe Good for You? EU Spending and Wellbeing, and it's by Lisa Delmoot, Professor of International Relations at the University of Stockholm, and that will be in 2 weeks' time on the 22nd of February, and you can find the details at our think tank pages online and register there. Thank you all very much again, and have a nice afternoon. Thanks.